What if God wasn't just out there, but also in here? Inside your dreams, your conflicts, your fears, and even your neuroses. Carl Jung once wrote, "It is not I who create myself, rather I happen to myself." And in that happening, those mysterious forces that shape our inner world, Jung saw something sacred, something divine. In a world that often separates religion from psychology, Jung dared to ask the hardest questions. What is God? Where do we find the divine? And how does our idea of God reflect the deepest layers of the human psyche? This isn't about theology. It's about meaning. It's about the intersection of psyche and spirit, and how Jung redefined our understanding of both. Welcome to the unfolding journey, where we explore the mysteries of the mind, the soul, and the path toward personal transformation. Here, we don't just ask what's wrong. We ask what's unfolding. If you're drawn to the edges of psychology, mythology, and spirituality, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into one of Carl Jung's most provocative and profound topics, his view on God and the human psyche. Carl Jung began his psychological career in the shadow of Sigmund Freud, but his break with Freud came when Jung refused to reduce religion to mere repression or delusion. Freud saw God as a projection, an infantile illusion, the psychological equivalent of a security blanket. Jung saw something else. He believed that religious experience wasn't just an escape from reality. It was a direct expression of the human psyche. He famously said, "Bidden or unbidden, God is present." This wasn't just metaphor. For Jung, the idea of God represented a core archetype embedded in the collective unconscious, a fundamental pattern that appears again and again in mythology, dreams, art, and spiritual traditions across cultures. Jung was not trying to prove God in the theological sense. Instead, he asked, why does the human psyche keep producing God images, again and again, in every culture and every era? From Zeus to Yahweh, from Krishna to Christ, from the Great Mother to the Eternal Father. Jung saw these not as mere inventions, but as archetypes. What is an archetype? An archetype is a primordial image, a universal pattern of thought and emotion. It's not created by the individual, but inherited and shared by all of humanity through the collective unconscious. The archetype of God, then, is the symbol of totality, unity, and the infinite, a symbol that helps the psyche orient itself towards something greater than the ego. To Jung, our yearning for the divine reflects the psyche's deepest longing, to become whole. Perhaps Jung's most radical idea was that the image of God and the image of the self are deeply intertwined. In Jungian psychology, the self is not the ego. The ego is just the conscious I, the center of our waking awareness. The self, however, is the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. And Jung found that when people encountered the self, whether in dreams, symbols, or deep inner work, they often experienced it as numinous, powerful, mysterious, and sacred. In many of his writings, Jung suggested that God is a symbol of the self, and the self is the God image within us. Let's be clear, Jung wasn't saying you are God in an egotistical sense. Instead, he proposed that the divine is not separate from the psyche. The image of God lives within us as a psychological reality, an inner guide, a source of mystery, and a call to individuation. The process of individuation, Jung's term for psychological growth, is not just about fixing trauma or managing behavior. It's about becoming whole. And that process, Jung believed, is inherently spiritual. In individuation, we confront the shadow, the rejected parts of ourselves. We integrate the anima or animus, our inner opposite, and we slowly begin to align with the self, our true nature. Along this journey, we often encounter images of the divine, not because we're escaping reality, but because we're touching the deepest truths within it. In this sense, psychological development is a spiritual journey. The call to become whole is also the call to reconnect with the divine center of our being. Jung's famous statement captures this beautifully. The experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego. Why? Because in encountering the self, what some might call God, we realize that we are part of something far larger than ourselves. Jung didn't just theorize about God. He worked with thousands of dreams and noted that religious symbols, crosses, mandalas, wise old men, divine children, frequently appeared, even in people who considered themselves non-religious. He believed these symbols were not arbitrary, but part of the psyche's attempt to express something transcendent. For example, a mandala, often seen in dreams or art, represents wholeness, a symbolic expression of the self. Jung called it the archetype of order. and saw it as the psyche's spontaneous way of representing the divine. When someone dreams of light, or hears a voice, or sees a numinous figure, it may be the unconscious revealing a deeper truth, not just about the person, but about reality itself. Jung often emphasized that whether or not God exists as an external being is not the psychologist's concern. What matters is that the experience of God is real for the psyche. He said, "I do not need to believe. I know." This statement wasn't about blind faith. It was about experience. Jung had experienced the self in powerful, transformative ways, and he had seen its effects in the lives of his patients. The God image, to Jung, was not a fantasy. It was a psychological fact. Even atheists, Jung noted, often carry unconscious God images in the form of ideology, purpose, or inner authority. The divine doesn't vanish when we deny it. It simply changes form. Despite his deep respect for spiritual traditions, Jung was critical of institutional religion when it became dogmatic, rigid, or disconnected from the individual's inner experience. He believed that religion, at its best, is a symbolic language of the soul. But when it becomes externalized and literalized, it loses its power. Jung warned that people often believe instead of knowing. That is, they accept doctrines without any inner transformation. He urged people to have a direct, living relationship with the divine, which he believed could only be found within. He even argued that Christianity had neglected the dark side of God, failing to account for the existence of evil, suffering, and the unconscious. His later writings explored this in depth, especially in Answer to Job, where he wrestled with the morality of God in the Bible and the need for divine wholeness. To clarify, Jung didn't claim to solve the question of whether God exists out there in a metaphysical sense. Instead, he argued that psychologically, God is one of the most powerful realities we can encounter. The image of God serves as an orienting center for the psyche, a symbol of meaning, unity, and transcendence. Without such a center, the ego becomes inflated or collapses into despair. The God image, when integrated healthily, becomes a compass for the soul. Carl Jung's view of God was neither traditional nor atheistic. It was deeply personal, rooted in the mysteries of the human psyche. He saw the divine not as an external authority, but as an inner reality, one that speaks through dreams, symbols, and the call to individuation. In Jung's world, to encounter God is to encounter your deepest self. To walk the spiritual path is to engage in the most honest form of psychological work. His work reminds us that healing, meaning, and transformation are not just clinical goals, they are sacred ones. If this journey into Jung's vision of God and the psyche resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to The Unfolding Journey. Here, we explore the deep and beautiful connection between the mind, the myth, and the mystery that lives in all of us. Leave a comment. What does the divine mean to you? And where have you seen it in your inner life? Until next time, keep unfolding.